ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Please sit down and make yourselves welcome. There are some refreshments at the back if you feel the need. I'm Robert Colville. I'm the Director of the Centre for Policy Studies, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel on how SMEs can address the housing shortage in association with THACM, run by Rob over here. I'm really grateful to Eddie for joining us. Eddie Hughes is obviously the Minister for Housing and Rough Sleeping, so incredibly well qualified to talk about this. Alex Morton is Head of Policy at the Centre for Policy Studies and a former housing advisor to David Cameron in Number 10. And Alice Denby is the Deputy Editor of CapEx and will be well placed to speak to the political implications of all this. We'll be asking questions with roving microphones, and so please have a think about what you want to ask. If you're watching via the internet, which I know many of you are, please ask them via the conference app, and they will magically appear on the laptops of my colleagues over there and be transferred to me by the miracle of digital technology. With that, I think that's everything I have to say. Apologies for the rattling in the background, but we will try and divert the trolleys to the carpeted route. Eddie, kick us off. How can SMEs address the housing shortage?
Well, good morning, everybody. And can I just begin by saying how exciting it is to be in a room with lots of people in it? It feels like we haven't had enough of this for the previous 18 months. So anyway, before I answer Rob's question, kick off with a shameless pitch to the room to say, yes, indeed, I'm a minister in the appropriate department, but I'm a civil engineer by degree. And my second job, so I started off as a groundswork engineer setting out foundations and drainage for housing sites, and then got poached by one of the companies, a small builder I was working for, to work as a building site manager. So I started my career proper working for a small builder called Greswold Construction in the West Midlands. So I feel I have some affinity for the subject, never mind my ministerial responsibility. And with regard to can we help? The question is, we have to help as a government. The government has a target to build 300,000 houses per year, and we need all hands to the pump in achieving that. Unfortunately, the direction of travel, medium-sized companies have kind of managed to hold their space in the marketplace, but small builders, we've seen quite a dramatic decrease in the contribution that they are making to our annual figures. And so, as a government, we need to be motivated to help them in every way we can to make sure that there's as level a playing field as possible for everybody to work on. And there are, I think, 2 or possibly 3 particular areas that we as a government need to focus on. The first one being planning. I'm sure that'll be talked about considerably during the next 55 minutes or so. So we need to make sure that the planning process is something that can be easily navigated by smaller builders. We hear a lot about the fact that there's a lot of planning permission given every year, and if we just built out those planning permissions, we'd be in a much better place. Well, sometimes those are held by the bigger players in the market. Smaller builders tend to get their planning permission and move on more quickly with development because that helps their cash flow. So we need to make sure that their access to the planning system is just as easy as it is for the bigger boys who can afford lawyers and so on to help them navigate the process. And secondly, with regard to finance, we need to be acutely aware of the fact that the government needs to step in and help where it can in terms of providing finance. And earlier this year, we had a £250 million accelerator fund announced where we were giving grants loans between £1 and £10 million to help builders with their finance and finance their projects. So I think if we can make improvements with leveraging more money and making the planning system easier, we'll have made considerable progress.
Thanks, Eddie. If anyone's standing at the back, I should stress there are some seats at the front. In fact, I know there are people standing at the back because I can see you. And I should also, this is completely separate from the topic, I also just want to say happy birthday to Eddie for yesterday. Spending the most important day of the year in the company of a few thousand fellow Conservatives.
What better way?
Indeed, yeah. I won't ask us to sing along. We did produce a cake for Matt Hancock one year, but sadly we didn't prepare in time. Rob, you are one of the medium-sized builders that Eddie referred to. How are things like? And we might get onto this in the Q&A, but before you were talking about especially the impact of the not just the pandemic, but the recovery and the labour shortage issues. What is the state of play for you guys?
The state of play is good, Rob, in terms of the market clearly is in very good shape at the moment. I think the biggest challenges facing us, unsurprisingly, is the surety of the land supply coming through, absolutely through the planning. Secondly, we are seeing an increasing pressure around labour cost and productivity. We were talking earlier, one of the biggest problems that we're having at the moment is we've seen quite a large rise in material costs, but also in labour costs. Material we expect to flatten back out. We can see what's happening with worldwide lumber, iron ore, etc. Prices have come back down. But for us, labour is a real issue. And, we have an ageing workforce in our industry. It's quite clear that kids don't want to go and stand on our sites at 7 o'clock in a February morning. We have to find a different way to do that. The issue we have in terms of productivity is watching our bricklayers who are earning £250 a day, where it was £200 a day 9 months ago. They will earn 4 days or a week's money in 4 days now and not come to work for the fifth day. That's quite common where we are as an industry. So we're not seeing an increased productivity, we're seeing lesser productivity. The answer clearly from our point of view is MMC. We've got to automate the process more, and that then conflicts, of course, with the smaller builders. How are they going to do that? We're going through an investment program at the moment to deliver an MMC factory. That's 55 million quid's worth of investment. How possibly could the smaller builders cope with that or have that to help their supply chain issues? Yeah.
Yes, and of course, you've got land yards to pay for. That's another 55 million right there. And in terms of just but you recognise that Eddie's point about the share of the SME share more broadly.
Well, firstly, if we look at production in the UK, we're going to achieve about 275,000 units this year. It was 220,000 2019. Fundamentally, the big three builders make up circa 50,000 of that. So Taylor Wimpey, Persimmon and Barratt's account for about a fifth of production in the UK. If you then take it to the largest 10, that is well over a third, nearly half the production in the UK. If we want to raise production, we've got to get back to where we were. We've got to have far more smaller builders in the marketplace. They will make that change. How much bigger and what's the aptitude for growth in those bigger builders? It won't push to where we need to be, I necessarily think. So smaller builders is really important we bring them through. It's been a difficult journey for us coming through from a smaller builder to a medium-sized builder. It's not an easy path out there.
Right. And Alex, you've done quite a lot of research for the CPS and written a few reports about the structure of the market and these structural obstacles that smaller builders face.
Yeah, I think the points that Eddie and Rob have made are very valid, and the point about the large builders being dominant is very true in a way that isn't true in other countries. And when you look at just the private side of things, not social councils, Section 106, the dominance of the Big 10 is even more pronounced. The thing that I'm going to talk about is land. I think land is the most important area where the government can get right. I have absolute faith in people like Rob to fix things like MMC and other issues in the medium term if the government can do the thing that only it can do, which is fix the planning system. And really the problem there is planning is too complicated. There is a very little land released. The net result of that is that the large house builders essentially dominate the land market. So if you look at the strategic land banks of the top 6 house builders, they are over 1 million plots. And those of you who are involved in planning, which many of you will be, will know that there's a 5-year land supply target. The target for the 5-year land supply across the entire country is just over 1 million plots. So basically, you have a system where there is a bottleneck due to the planning system that means that the large house builders can work out where land is going to come forwards, put options on it, get it into their strategic land banks, and that slows down the supply of land into the system. And there are 2 ways you can break this dynamic. There was the first option that the government took, which was we're going to release huge swathes of greenfield land, and this is going to totally change the way that the market works. Some of us had political doubts about this from the start, myself included, but that was where they went. And it is logically, it's a perfectly sensible way to try and fix this problem. I think we all know now it's not going to happen. Michael Gove has clearly paused the planning reforms. I'm sure Eddie's not going to betray any confidence if he said that, it's probably not going to be quite the package that we first envisaged. So what do you do if you're not doing that massive, let's just release loads of land out and, flood the market so that small guys can get hold of land and start actually building? You have to change the mix. You need a mix of sites, different sizes, different tenures. So basically, you need the SMEs, the small and the medium guys, to be building a lot more and getting more of the land that is coming through the system. And the planning system has to, I think, be a bit more explicit about this. And I am uber free market. In general, I'm a classical liberal who is hugely believing in the power of the market. But once the government has interfered to the point where it is rationing massively the supply of land, you have to make sure you're actually getting land into the hands of people who will build fast, build quality, and work with local communities. So you can't just say, we've created a bottleneck, and now there's a problem. Oh, well, that's a bit difficult. You have to say, we know there will be a bottleneck, and we're going to come up with a planning system that deals with that. Because the large house builders will only build if they can sell, and they tend to build quite identical, fairly unattractive homes that limits their market share. So what happens is you have a large site with a large house builder which ticks the box on land supply for the council for the 5-year land supply, but it's getting built out very, very slowly. There aren't many homes. Local people often get annoyed because it's a brownfield site and there are greenfield sites being pushed. At the same time, you've got this giant brownfield site, sometimes greenfield, sometimes brownfield, but particularly when it's brownfield, deeply annoyed local people going, there's this huge bit of land that should be being built on. We've given it permission. Why is it coming forward so slowly? So the planning system really has to say, look, we're going to change. It's going to be about delivery. We're going to give it land to the SMEs, to people who are going to build as fast as they can, rather than just saying the large house builders will be allowed to dominate the system. Because for me, the politics of that is just much more attractive. And one of the things that I think Michael Gove is going to have to do is bring forward a planning bill that can actually get through the House of Commons. And therefore, in a way, I don't think there's anyone, and I'd love it in the questions if you want to say it, I'd love it if anyone thinks that the large house builders building more homes is more attractive than the SMEs building more homes. I am 99% sure that if you asked 100 people in most communities, would you rather have local SMEs and SMEs building homes, or would you rather have Persimmon, that they will say, we would rather have SMEs and others building those homes. So the government has now an opportunity. They've ditched one approach, they're going for another, and as part of that, they need to force local plans and planning to be about working with a greater range of builders, particularly the SME sector, who are more prepared to get involved and talk about design, to talk about quality, to agree to, I've had lots of discussions with the SME sector who are prepared to agree build-out rates. They say, yeah, if you actually gave us the land, we would agree to a trajectory of build-out. So if you give us a brownfield site, you will know that in 5 years' time we will, unless COVID happens or something, a big economic downturn, you will know that those homes have actually got built, and that will change the politics for me as a council leader in a way that the current system doesn't allow for. So my final sort of summing up is the planning bill has to be something that can pass. The planning bill has to be something that to prioritise making house builders and communities work together, and the planning bill has to be something that puts SMEs and growing their market share as part of that fix, both for political and policy reasons.
Thanks, Alex. And I should add another aspect of CPS research you didn't touch on, but it's just very clear, and is the way that after a downturn in the property market, SMEs tend to get squeezed out. Yeah. So we have seen a very clear, I think most people in this room will know, we've seen a very, very clear pattern since the 80s of crunch hits. We lose 10, 15, 20% of SMEs. Doesn't really recover very well. Next crunch hits, we lose another tranche. So there is an element here of fighting against.
And that's a very good point, Rob. And it's partly related to the land point in that they basically at that point they have often had to, unlike the large house builders who sometimes have cash reserves, they've had to take out loans. They can't churn the land through the system fast enough, and basically they go bankrupt. So again, it's a weird offshoot of our crazy planning system.
Yes. But Alex mentioned the politics a few times. Alice, I think this is what you're going to touch on. Is using SMEs as the driver of development a sort of silver bullet that will appease the Tory benches?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, Tories have got this kind of fundamental dilemma that, they're stuck between their traditional base, which is, homeowners in leafy parts of the countries who are opposed to development, and we might unkindly call them the NIMBYs, and then the dilemma of not building enough homes, locking an entire generation out of home ownership, and young people never voting Tory. And also the fact that home ownership is kind of a fundamentally conservative value. It's both, something that you work for and aspire to, but it also represents, security and a chance to put down roots and be part of a community. And I think home ownership is one of the biggest indicators of whether or not people vote Conservative. And I know what it's like. I've seen it. I used to work for a Kent MP, and we had to support numerous local campaigns against building development, in case it might ruin the kind of unique character of the local area. And I would go with her to these kind of utterly charmless villages in, pretty nondescript countryside. I'd be like, what, here? This is what we're protecting? But, you'd have to get the boss out with the placards to oppose the development, to make sure she got re-elected, to deliver the kind of changes that we want to see. So I think house building can therefore feel to Tory MPs like a bit of a zero-sum game. But, everyone is losing from the housing shortage. So we need to get this fixed. And I think there are a couple of things that can help politically with this kind of devil's choice. And I think the first is to make sure that you enfranchise people in the planning process. The Adam Smith Institute recently brought out an interesting paper that said that found like 71% of residents would support local development if they were given a say in the kind of homes that would get built. And I think it's a question of reframing the argument. It's not just about house numbers. Talk about the benefits, the new services, and the economic, the infrastructure, all of these benefits that new development can bring to local areas. And a second and related point is, let's talk about beauty and good design. It's not just a numbers game. There's, green space, walkable streets, houses with a unique character. These are all part of what makes somewhere a place, what makes somewhere people are proud to call a home. And as a side note, I think all too often people think that beautiful buildings is some sort of Victorian pastiche. I think we need to get away from that. Good modern design, light, space is just as important as period charm. And so we shouldn't be afraid of glass and steel necessarily. And then finally, I guess politically, one thing that might give the Conservatives some hope about getting this bill through is just the sheer arithmetic, the sheer, parliamentary maths. At the last election, the Conservatives reached out well beyond these kind of NIMBY heartlands. And now it's time to show that they can govern for the whole country. And, if not now, with a big majority and a kind of new base, when will we not be bold in planning reform? And the fact, I think, that Boris has appointed Michael Gove to this office shows that he recognises that. If anyone can do it, it's him. So I just wish him luck.
Well, yes, I slightly provocatively tweeted on the way up from London that what a lot of lovely, beautiful green countryside there was between London and Manchester, and just imagine how many homes you could build on it. And genuinely, I've not said anything on Twitter which has got me called more rude names in such a short space of time, including by Eddie when he came in. But Eddie, perhaps before we go to questions from the audience, you could maybe pick up some of the points that were made there about the planning system, about MMC and skills, and how do we and access to finance as well.
Yeah, just start with the fact that before I became a minister in the department, I was the department's whip as well. So having worked in the whip's office for a year, I completely attuned to the fact that despite the fact that we might have a big majority, some people move as a flock, and the government needs to be mindful of the pragmatics of getting bills through Parliament regardless of the size of its majority. But the other point that was made is with regard to where our MPs come from. Now we do have a new base. We have more MPs in the north of the country than we had previously, and they will have a view as to where houses are built. And I guess regardless of the numbers that we hit, we need to make sure that we are building beautiful homes and we're building at a quality that people are happy with, which is why I'm delighted the Building Safety Bill is going through Parliament at the moment, and I'm going to be the Minister responsible for the New Homes Ombudsman, so I hope that drives a significant increase in the quality of the product that we're getting rather than us just focusing simply on the numbers. But we have a number of challenges. Clearly, the planning system is one of those. I feel that we're moving in the right direction. Michael Gove clearly being given the opportunity to kind of take the department in a slightly different direction, not least because of the drive and the focus on levelling up. We're also facing perhaps a slight difference in terms of where people want to work now. I work in 2 Marsham Street in the department's office. That building used to have several thousand people working in it, and at the moment it probably has a quarter of those number of people. So maybe we're going to see a difference in terms of where people choose to live because they've experienced the idea of working remotely, and maybe the idea of beautiful homes and tree-lined streets is something that people will see more appeal to in the future. So I think we've got a unique opportunity now to fix the planning system in such a way that it will allow people access to land, to build more homes, but to build them of a density and of a beauty in locations where they're needed, and perhaps address this for a kind of once in a generation.
And Rob, can I turn to you? I mean, Eddie actually just mentioned the pandemic and people wanting to move to new places. And I know we've talked privately about the change in demand in the market, and you developed basically a very posh garden shed that you could plug into people's homes to help them work. So A, have you seen people changing in the market? And B, in terms of the planning stuff, is that, as Alex says, a silver bullet? And are SMEs better positioned? Again, I remember us talking a while back about a development you did where essentially you built the hospital first. You managed to absolutely slash local opposition to the development by the fact that you just made it very, very clear the benefits the community would receive.
So that point first, the site you're referring to there was a strange one. It was at the time it was the largest consent in the country in an AONB. And it went through locally with local backing, but we delivered £7 million worth of off-site highways work before we built the first house. We delivered the primary school, brand new primary school, that opened in 2.5 years after we started on the development, and we're delivering a home for a new hospice, a new village green, and a shop and a cafe that we put into a community business trust. So in that particular instance, we had 3-to-1 the ratio of support from the local community versus those against. And it is, I do think a lot of the time the debate is about infrastructure, it is about what's that community getting. Is it just getting a load more houses, can put more cars on the road, take up more school places, take up more doctor spaces, or is it actually going to do that? For us, I think design is hugely important now, and I think that's something that's becoming increasingly important to people. And that's around, for us, we've taken a different approach. So we have committed as a business that every home we deliver will be zero carbon in lifetime use from 2025 onwards, carbon neutral in production, but also we're pushing zero carbon placemaking. And that's starting to think about the layout, whereas traditionally, we would start with architects laying roads down and then houses. We now look at the natural form. What asset have we got there? Where's the woodland? Where's the river courses? How are we going to do that? And we design around that, which creates a different form in a different place. I think that's part of making design better, making it more beautiful, absolutely. And that's important to local people. Not just bulldozing a field and shoving loads of houses in it, I think is critical to where we're going. In terms of work from home, we certainly clearly saw that a lot to start with. We are hopeful. We're waiting to see whether it continues. For us, operating outside the M25, we've seen quite a sizable migration of people from, particularly families, from inside London to outside London in the sites that we're delivering. And whereas we saw perhaps 10 or 15% of our buyers traditionally, we're now at 50% on some of those sites. And yes, we developed a home office hub or a home hub in the bottom of the garden. So when you moved in, that was there ready to go, and it was your office space, etc., alongside that too. And that was part of the package. We're still seeing very good take up for that, and we're still seeing people that are now commuting in perhaps 2 days a week rather than 5, etc., etc. So there is a balance to be had there. Yeah.
But I mean, I think this speaks to Alex's point about the diversity of the market. That if there is a segment of people who really want zero carbon homes, then the big house builders are not going to provide them because they've got their model. If there are people who want retirement housing, if there are people who want student accommodation, if there are people who want key worker housing, there are all these different segments of the market. And I think maybe one of the, challenge for Alex and Eddie is that we've made the mistake of just thinking of it as one market and thinking of it as a 300,000 target to reach, and it doesn't really matter what kind of housing goes into that.
Yeah, I think the 2 points around design, I could not agree more on design. I think I did a first housing paper, got it back in 2010 called Making Housing Affordable, which also said if the Tory party didn't care about home ownership, the Tory party didn't have a long-term future, which at the time everyone thought, was a bit mad. And now, thankfully, I think more and more people have realised this is true. If you don't give people a stake and some kind of ownership in society, the Conservative Party will literally die off, and centre-right views will die off. So the design point was fundamental to that paper, and it's still fundamental to my thinking. I think you have to, and whatever the planning bill does, it has to empower good design. And I disagree slightly with Alice, I'm afraid, on glass and steel. There's quite clear opinion polling on what types of housing people like, and it's not what funky architects like. It's very, very different. And there's a problem that the planning system empowers funky architects and town planners.
Just like to apologise to any funky architects in the audience.
They're in places like Dalston, I'd love funky architecture has its place, but it's basic. The problem is that they're like, let's build this everywhere. And you're like, most people don't want it in their area. If you want it in your area, in Hackney, it'd be great. And like, I'm a fan sometimes of those buildings, but you have to listen to what local people want in local areas rather than imposing a view of what you think architecture looks like. And I think that is a real problem. The Tory party needs to be a bit bolder about that and standing up for design that their voters and their people want to see. And that will reduce the politics. But the point you made about diversity is also key, Rob, because if you just are selling into a single, in most cities you have 1 and 2 bedroom flats, and then outside that you have 3 or 4 bedroom, 3 to 5 bedroom houses priced at the upper end of the market, but usually not often. And that basically means you're selling to a small pool of the people who buy a house each year. And that is mad, and it means that you reduce the supply. And the large house builders, who I keep going back to, control the flow of land into the market, will only build enough to supply that particular market, and that means there will be a perennial general undersupply. Yeah, great. In the boom years, one of the problems is the house builders are now saying, oh, look, at the top of the boom, we just about hit 200,000 homes. We need to be building consistently 250,000 good quality homes with the infrastructure that sort of Eddie and Rob and Alex would all agree with, I'm sure, has to come along with that. And that is the way that you solve the housing crisis, not by, in 1 or 2 years, at the peak of the boom, the large house builders drip-feeding enough supply out.
Sorry, can I just add very briefly to say, obviously we've got the Future Home Standard that we're going to be consulting on as well with regard to reducing those carbon emissions. So all properties built are going to be seeing a drastic reduction in their carbon footprints.
I think I just want to come back on Alex's point about funky architecture. I think if you look at a lot of people who actually own period properties, they like the facade and then they remodel the inside. So what I'm talking about is not pastiche, I'm talking about light and space, and that can have, modern...
I totally... My point is, no, I'm not really jiving, because I know you don't really think that we should be going out into the green fields of Tory England saying we're going to start building sort of modernist or brutalist monstrosities. It's more, I totally take your point, but there is a serious point around planners and architects sometimes do go in and say, this is what good design looks like, and the community doesn't agree with that, and
Absolutely,
that can be a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's open it up to questions from the audience. If there are any representatives of the big house builders in here, don't worry, you are allowed to speak. We're not going to kind of boo or anything, but the lady at the back.
Hello, I was just wondering, how do we square the ambitions of the Environment Bill with house building? So I know that Thacum Homes are planning to build an area of nature connectivity in West Sussex. And I suppose there's 2 big ambitious bills going through Parliament right now. How do we square that kind of development on wildlife corridors and areas of nature connectivity with building more homes?
Yeah. And I could add one to that for Eddie. Someone pointed out to me recently that we have a new target for that you have for developments over a certain size, you have to increase biodiversity by 10%, which is a laudable ambition. But the result is that you then have to get a survey done, which by one of the very small number of people who are qualified to give the survey, which increase your costs and delays the time, which is another example of that tension, maybe.
Well, I think 2 things. So first of all, planning is, first and foremost, a local responsibility. It's important that it stays that way, I think. It's important that local councils who know their areas best determine what planning is allowed in their area. But with regard to the idea that we might be extending biodiversity, and Rob's point about at the moment there might be a limited number of people capable of doing that survey, well, the government is driving that direction by making that commitment. And I think the natural consequence, once the government has set direction like that, is that more people will come into the market to make that provision. That will be a natural consequence of market effect.
Anyone else want to take or we can? I mean, we've got quite a lot of questions. So actually, we take a couple more from the audience and then let everyone.
I'm happy to
okay,
comment there.
but Rob, sorry. Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting debate, isn't it? We need to find a way that the environment can work alongside housing. Clearly, the environment is hugely important. We've committed to 20% biodiversity net gain by 2025 rather than 10%. For me, we take that example in West Sussex. We have something there that is predominantly agricultural fields at the moment. Yes, there are hedgerows through it, but it's separated from a wildlife site by 4 lanes of the A24. how do we enhance the site that we're creating, and how do we make sure that housing works well alongside the environment? The two are often pushed into conflict. We need to find a way to make them work together. And that is about looking at the natural asset we start with, look at how we can enhance that natural asset, looking at how we can make that work, and we have to do that as an industry. The days of bulldozing fields and just putting housing in it is completely wrong. We've got to find a way now where we look at our natural water assets, our natural nature corridors. Biodiversity Net Gain fundamentally is about connecting spaces of wildlife, and we can use the sites. We can open up parts of the countryside to create that connectivity that perhaps traditionally hasn't done that, So I think it is important that that's right at the top of our agenda as an industry. We've certainly placed it at the top of our agenda for what we're doing, absolutely.
Yeah, and
Thank you. My name's Will Brett. I'm a campaigns consultant. I work with people and communities to develop campaigns in favour of good development. I wanted to pick up on Alice's point about public enfranchisement, which seems really important. And last night, Michael Gove set out a very powerful agenda for what I would call community power, or local people in control of the things that matter, including high streets, football clubs, but homes as well. I just wanted to invite the panel's speculation on what that might mean in practice for the planning reforms. If this is a department which is about empowering people at the local level, what that might mean. Is it about street votes like the Adam Smith Institute suggests? Is it about really investing in community engagement at the local plan level rather than the level of individual developments? Yeah, just speculation about what it means for planning.
And another question, gentleman there.
Thank you. Chris Wood from Shelter. I was really interested in the points made about, and I agree that there's a real need to get land to SMEs to get the diversity of building and more built out overall. The question is, how do we do that without, or do we need to reduce land prices in order to do that? Because whilst they're so high, it's very hard to get the land bought, and also then to get good quality design, infrastructure built, and social housing as well, which is the way the government can beat the other target around tackling homelessness.
Eddie, do you want to start on that?
Well, yeah, just to begin with regard to local engagement, I think the beauty of the world that we live in now, we've all got a little bit more used to communicating via Teams and perhaps using the internet a bit more than we've have done previously. So I think we need to have a drive to have greater digitalisation of all things that are related to planning. So rather than putting notices on lampposts, that we're engaging the local community, and that will be driven by local councils to get them more involved, but to make it easier for them to be involved, so that when an area is building their local plan, that the documents are available online, that it's very clear what it is that's being discussed or proposed, and that they have the opportunity, rather than simply turn up at the council chamber and speak from the gallery or something like that, that we're using the modern technology of things like Teams communications to bring the public closer to the process and to make sure that that information is really accessible and really straightforward and easy for them to understand. And I think that's a quite exciting development that we will take from the pandemic, that greater use of products like that.
Alex or Rob, do you have a...
Okay, so I think the point about local engagement is an interesting one. We'll probably have a report out in the next few months, which will hopefully talk a bit more about this, partly because we were waiting to see where the planning reforms were going, so we want to make sure that it's relevant. But the point you made actually about SMEs and I think the two of them, to me, flow together. So we currently have a planning system that is a tick box, very text-driven, very sort of like fill in this survey, do this thing, do that. That is not a particularly helpful way. Most people want to visualise what is going to be built in their area, and that does mean what it actually looks like, feels like. The points Rob was making about the layout are important as well. There should be a planning system that is all about the local council and local people engaging with developers to create something that both sides, that the developers and the house builders can sell, and that the local community actually likes and can live with in their area. And that means that sounds easy to say. The problem is that will require, if you actually do it, removing quite a lot of the planning gumph that gets in the way, streamlining the system, making it more efficient, making it more about those local engagement. And if you do that and you ally that to a focus on different tenures, different sites, the build-out points, you will have a very different local plan. So you will keep the framework of the local plan system we've had in place for decades, and I don't think is going to go anywhere, but the actual how it works on the ground would be to move away from tick box, tick box, tick box, this legalistic process that isn't particularly good for anyone, and has squeezed out the SMEs and empowered essentially a group of large house builders, perhaps in our market, and create something that is more diverse and local people can actually live with.
And so before Rob comes in, I just want to make a point on this, abusing my position as chair. We are about to have the most extraordinary moment in British planning that, assuming even like 50% of the shift from working from home, or even 20% of the shift from working from home continues, we will suddenly have, even before the pandemic, we did a report on this called Reshaping Spaces, which I urge you all to read and is hopefully available at the back. Even before the pandemic, vacancy rates in high streets were incredibly high, especially in the areas most in need of levelling up. And that's going to have been exacerbated by recent changes. We are going to need to transform essentially the centre of every British community in really exciting ways, and that's obviously a huge opportunity for SME house building. It's a huge opportunity. This is why Alex's report suggested the first thing we do as part of the local plan is work out how much commercial space we actually need, and then work out what to do with the rest of it. The issue is, of course, there are not many people in the country who are capable of drawing up really, really good local plans that transform a city in a beautiful and sustainable way. And councils probably don't have the resources to do themselves. And I know that's an issue that Eddie and his colleagues are looking at. So this is if we get this right, it could be fantastic both for house building and for placemaking. If we get it wrong, we could be doing a sort of what we did in the 1960s and 70s and screwing up even more communities. Rob, sorry,
I think there's an interesting challenge, isn't there? Because we have a changing face of a high street in town and city centres, but we also have a demand where we're seeing people look at their property, they have their home far more, and what they want from that. And one of the things there absolutely is more outside space, is more of a family home. It's the values they've got around that as well. So there's an interesting challenge there. I think community involvement is hugely important, but we have to kind of get over the piece of not wanting housing, which is, fundamentally a problem we start as a base place we start from. It's more about what can come for that community. What does that community want? What's that community looking for? What does that community need? And if we start to engage and ask what the community wants, and then introduce that alongside the housing we're bringing forward, I think that's hugely important.
So, Alice, when you were pounding the pavements with your former boss, was there a sense that if they'd had a say, they'd been keener, or would they still be waving the banners?
I mean, they were certainly most worried about their services, cars on the road, GP appointments, schools. These were certainly things that they were most worried about, but you did also get the sense that they were just opposed to any housing. And they knew that in opposing this, they were forcing their own children out of the area. But, they want to have a view of a field or whatever. And sorry, just on street votes, in case people don't know, this is the idea that people who live in an individual street, if a majority vote for development or extensions to their houses, then it can go ahead. And just to say that seems like a really good opportunity for SMEs. Yeah. I don't think it's the whole answer, but it could transform certain streets and be a good way to get SMEs.
Eddie just wanted to comment.
I just wanted to make a very brief comment and give a shout out to the APBG for SME Builders. It's chaired by Andrew Lua. 300 companies signed up to that, and that is a great conduit through which information flows to ministers and from ministers back to businesses in terms of this engagement process.
Listen, so bloody hell! I think you're going to be mobbed afterwards, Eddie. The gentleman in the green jumper.
Hi, thank you. My question is, a lot of the planning engagement it comes from people who tend to have a stake in the area for very obvious reasons. They want to protect what they have. They tend to be maybe older, maybe retirees, maybe have more time, and they engage with all of these sort of things in the local council a bit more. But collectively, the loss to, say, my generation is it's dispersed. It's something that maybe you're transitioning between different rental properties and so on. So it's quite hard to get engagement from sort of the collective generation that can't buy into that. So my question is, how can we push the planning system to help that sort of demographic more?
And the guy in the front row. And
Hi there, I'm Enrique Vortilevich. I represent small and medium-sized house builders.
Yay!
Yeah. Just sorry to be a bit of a panellist here, there is something going on in biodiversity net gain currently that will automate the process more easily so that you don't need as many ecologists on the simpler sites. Of course, the problem with biodiversity is it's based on habitats, not biodiversity. So building a £5 million green bridge doesn't count as part of your biodiversity net gain. So the great work you do still isn't understood by local people because the policy doesn't enable it. Back to Alex's point, Alex understands that the planning system isn't just site allocations, it's not just all these elements, it's planning policy, going to all the different features. But land competition was going to be delivered in the planning reforms because it opened up the market so it's not just a small number of players. And that comes back to social housing. We can't deliver enough social housing because there isn't competition of land to deliver it. And the government needs to understand that, not just that, but SMEs train 7 in 10 construction apprentices that make up 90% of the training capacity. They build the social homes, they build the council homes, they do all the stuff that we want to see improved, and they're the predominant rural employers. So without them, you have nothing. You literally have a stifled market. So my question is, how do you bring competition back to land so that more players can get involved?
Brilliant. And can we just add the guy behind, because we've got so many questions, and then we'll swing back to this side on the next round.
So in terms of how do you improve competition in terms of land, so one of the things that the government could do quite easily is amend the MPPF and actually use that as a form of guidance to require local authorities to ensure that a minimum amount of land is set aside for SMEs. You don't need legislation, you just need to change the guidance. I think there's a certain amount of naivety, so I've worked as a planner for nearly 40 years, and assuming that by involving people in the process somehow they'll support development, in my experience, is rubbish. I've spent many, many years and been to many events trying to do that, but actually most people, and it tends to be the retired who turn up to these events, the I'm all right Jack generation, actually they're just not interested. I think if we're expecting public consultation to be the answer, I think that's wrong.
Some really good questions there, although that's probably the first time I've heard the phrase, quick, easy and simple and amend the MPPF in the same sentence.
Well, just to begin, clearly, that point that I made about the fact that if we make the process more digital, more online and more accessible, then I think a natural consequence of that will be that more young people get involved, and which is why I disagree slightly with the honourable gentleman who said that engagement doesn't work. Well, it might not have done previously, because previously you had to go to the town hall and speak in a room. Well, if you can do that, and we've all been doing it, if you can just turn on a Teams meeting and make your pitch then for 5 minutes while sat there in your dressing gown, of course it's going to be more accessible. And I'm a bit disappointed, sir, with your pessimism. I'm more optimistic.
We've done that. It's actually working with this gentleman here. And actually, there are some communities where it does work, but my experience, having done it, is that in most cases it doesn't.
I'm going to make it my objective to find some consultants who actually have made this work, and we'll see whether this man stays in business. Anyway, but also to say, with regard to the National Planning Policy Framework, of course that is something that is going to have to be reviewed in line with the new planning regulations. It would be crazy to not do it. But as Rob says, not exactly a straightforward process, and one that will take some time.
But can I push you on the principle of setting aside a sort of a proportion of each development for SMEs, or that kind of approach?
I think we'll have to see when we have the new planning bill pitched as to what's available in it. However, conceptually, I'm warm to that idea.
I was just going to say, it is a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? Because the people who are most likely to come and engage in this consultation process are the people who already live there and already own the homes, and that isn't going to help the next generation very much. So, I mean, I don't have the answers, but something to think about, Eddie, how you can bring in both people who already live in the area and people who might wish to live in the future, because they need to say as well.
I mean, this sort of goes back to this isn't just about house building, but I remember someone telling me, David Cameron sort of wrote a speech, like one of his first speeches as Prime Minister, included a reference to I will be a champion not just for the companies that already exist, but for the companies that don't already exist there. And the civil service tried to take it out because they were just like, no, we were quite happy just dealing with the companies that already exist.
It's a difficult debate, isn't it? I mean, how do we find a way to engage? Experience of consultation is that You know, it's the people, the very noisy, dare I say, minority that will come forward objecting to development. You know, and actually we need to find a way as an industry to engage and enthuse the silent majority, dare I say. You know, I think most people do accept the need for housing. It's about how it comes forward, but we do need to engage the voice and empower the voice of those that want housing. You know, if we have, otherwise we are going to have a proportion of our generation, you know, portion of our population that will not be able to own a home. You know, and you know, we've watched the age of a first-time buyer, particularly in the southeast, roll back. It's now late 30s, early 40s. You know, unless we do something, that is not going to change. You know, and we've got to give them a power to voice. How many of them actually have just given up? You know, and I think that's a dangerous place to be. We've got to give them that say locally that counteracts the no, no, no. And give them a reason to say yes, you know, by creating developments that look great, that are built to a very good quality and deliver the housing that's required, including social housing.
And on the issues of competition for land or, you know, quotas for SMEs, do either of those, I mean, any thoughts on those? I mean, obviously, something which guarantees you access, you know, more access to more land.
So I mean, we don't have a problem with land. We control in excess of 50,000 plots, 60,000 plots of land across the southeast. That's coming through the system. That's not consented. The biggest issue, I think, is the cost and the uncertainty in that promotion for SMEs. You know, it will to get a planning permission, get a planning permission for 250 plots is going to be 7 figures. That's a lot to risk for an SME. That's a lot to risk, not knowing what the outcome's going to be. It's a lot to roll a dice on, you know. And that's the world. You know, we have to find a way, which, dare I say it, actually, the planning reforms to a degree that were proposed about allocating zones did some of that. You know, I think the communication could have been better potentially, but you know, clearly there's a lot of contention there with that. But we do have to find a way to give more surety to the industry, so that when they're going to put their money into something, they're not potentially gambling it away. And
it's not a case of just whoever can afford the best lawyer wins the...
No, I mean, you know, fundamentally, to promote a site and to get it, to take it through to an application and then a permission stage on 250, 300 units for a full detailed application will cost you near £1 million nowadays. That's where it is. That's a lot for an SME to try and cash flow and to roll dice on.
I think, and the point the point is we spend a lot of money on this. The consultation already exists. It's just badly done and doesn't really get people on side. So we have the worst of all worlds where the SMEs are clobbered and local people don't really feel they actually get that much of a say. And there is a small minority who then often just resort to saying, no, no, no. Well, actually, there's a nightingale there. I'm sure I spotted one. So therefore, for this reason, we should hold off on development. So it's more about changing. Your point about, you know, you can't trust people. There will be a small group who will always be irreducibly opposed. The problem is for the Conservative Party that you have to massage that through good design, infrastructure and other measures to as low as it can go before you can start trying to push more homes through. And a related point I'm going to quickly throw in is immigration, which doesn't always, which the Conservative Party is going to struggle to persuade the country, the Green, particularly south of bits, to build lots more houses. They will just about accept it if it's people's children not being able to become homeowners or have families. They will not accept it for net migration of 300,000. I've never really understood that if you have a government that wants to push on planning reform, you have to link that to immigration. I just can't see. Every time I went in my previous job, I occasionally would go to events and listen to local people, and immigration, this was in the early 2010s, always came up, and the government has to tackle that if it really wants to push on planning.
And let's ask some questions from this side. Here we go. Well, the cluster back there.
Hi, hello. I'm Jackie Gardner from Coventry, and in a previous life I was a planning consultant. But what strikes me is, you know, we're hearing about the whole market for housing, and it's great to hear all the ways in which we're trying to encourage SMEs to have a greater contribution to that. But is there not a way of concentrating on ensuring that the 1 million units that have already been granted planning permission actually get built? I mean, through the planning system, the planning reforms that are coming through, should there not be some element of a stick to encourage the developers to actually build what's already there? That's my first point. The second point is you're talking about the building for migrants. What is there in the planning system that will prevent many of the houses that are built, particularly in the south of England, going to foreign investors?
Thank you very much. David Parry from the Chartered Institute of Building. Rob has briefly touched on this, but engaging in the local plan process is often time-consuming, resource-heavy, financially costly, and ultimately uncertain. if we are to prioritise SMEs through local plans, we fundamentally need to change the local plan process entirely. So how do you propose we do this?
Just a small question there, and then yes, the...
Hello, Robert McLaren from Policy Connect. We're currently undertaking a commission into smart homes and independent living for older and disabled people, chaired by Councillor Sir Paul Carter. My question is, there's been lots of discussion about how to sell the benefits of building new homes to communities, and what role you see for the idea of lifetime homes, homes that are accessible and that work for older people as part of that offer to the community.
Another good set of issues to get into. Does someone else want to start, rather than just going to Eddie first time for everything? Or you can just go to Eddie if you...
Well, I would say one of the problems is having, so immediately before I came to Parliament, I worked for YMCA initially as development director. So I've seen how complicated it can be to get planning permission on a piece of land and then get the finance that's required and then engage with builders, do tendering and so on. And so there can be quite a lag between getting planning permission and seeing something built out. I've had that experience myself. And so it feels like one of those problems that we've considered many options as to how we can drive it. Should we be charging council tax on plots and things like that? So it feels to me there is still some work to be done as to what is the mechanism that persuades people to build a bit quicker, but still mindful of the fact that it can take a long time from planning permission in order to get the financial package and so on in place in order for diggers to turn up on site. With regard to improvements in the local plan, for starters, it would be nice if we had some of them and that they took less time to do. I think we're probably still in the position where about 50% of councils don't have an up-to-date plan, and it can take, so I believe, 7 years in order to get a plan finalised. The government's ambition is to reduce that to about 30 months. So I guess that's one of the things. First of all, we need people to have local plans in place, and secondly, we need to make the process of achieving one much more streamlined so it can be done quicker. And finally, with regard to lifetime homes, we've been consulting on changes to the building regs to determine what is an appropriate level of change to make sure that places are accessible. But also what we need to do is make sure that people occupy a house that is appropriate to their current needs. People frequently become wedded to a property. They have an attachment to it that's based on emotion rather than pragmatism. And I guess perhaps we need to make sure that the properties that we're building, and we frequently see this done through small and medium-sized builders, that they are of a style that people will be drawn into, and that kind of more bespoke building that happens from smaller builders, I think, is one of those things that will draw people out of their property that they're under-occupying and into something that's more appropriate.
Can I come in on that under-occupation point? I mean, stamp duty is one of the biggest barriers to people downsizing. You need to do something about that if you want to encourage people to move into low lifetime homes.
I think just coming in there, actually, I do agree entirely on the stamp duty point when you're downsizing. I think what's interesting for us is that we build about 5-6% of the product we build are bungalows, and it's our most oversubscribed product continually. And we tend to find that every bungalow we sell usually frees up a 3 or 4 bedroom family house somewhere else. And that comes back to inclusive communities. You know, that's about creating a community that's not just apartments, but it is apartments, smaller houses, larger houses, bungalows, and having what that community needs in entirety. That's a good, balanced, active community, and I think that's important in the places that we're creating.
I mean, Alex, I know, just to say, you once told me that in your 15 years or so of writing policy reports about housing, the only one which had got you sort of like nationwide media coverage and stopped in the street was when you called for more bungalows.
Well, occasionally we get coverage that was like, "You bastard, you want to destroy all our green fields." This was the only time we got coverage where people were like, "This is amazing, this guy's great. He recognised that old people love bungalows. I love bungalows and there are none in my local area." So Rob's point is spot on in that the bungalow is the most architecturally sort of disliked, but actually really vernacularly popular, and it frees up a 3/4 family bed home. So there's this weird view that, oh, if you build a 2-3 bed bungalow, it's a bad use of space. But you're like, well, often people moving to that will be moving from a family home, freeing up for the next generation. So there's a lack of joined up thinking there. But I do want to come back on lifetime homes, and that's exactly, this is the problem with the planning system. And you seem like a lovely guy, but this is the problem with the planning system. Everyone's got a bloody bell and whistle they want to attach to it. I'm like, if I could, would take a flamethrower to all of this. All I want is land allocation, local community engagement on infrastructure and design. And, you know, I want Rob or whoever to be able to go to the community and say, this is what we're offering. Do you like us or do you like someone else? And I want a tenure mix. Though that's what I think the planning system consists of. The problem is everyone says, you know, we need the planning system. Oh, it's very complicated. But then they're forced to by stakeholder after stakeholder. But we need to make sure that lifetime homes are embedded in an anti-obesogenic environment and sustainable transport. We've got to improve our, et cetera, et cetera. And you end up with a formal legalistic process that no one really believes in. And that is the biggest thing that Michael Gove is going to have to get his head around. You can either choose to please all the stakeholders, or you can choose to have a planning system that focuses on local engagement, local people, and what house builders can actually do and deliver, because they also need to say just as much as the community, because they're the ones who are going to build it. And my fear is, as ever, the government will talk about streamlining, talk about, like, we're going to, you know, make things easier, but then come out with all the same planning gumph and all this legalistic jargon that will lock us back into the same dysfunctional planning system that we've got as it is.
And does anyone want to tackle the questions about foreign investors and how to turn permissions into delivery? So again, I'll recommend a report in the back called the Housing Guarantee, which suggests that permissions should be accompanied by, should be basically turned into contracts for delivery with kind of specific, not obviously retrospectively, but in future with specific.
I should jump in. Given you're referencing my work, I feel slightly embarrassed. Yes, the lady made a very good point. I've always thought, in return for getting planning permission, you should agree to indicative build-out rates. I just think, obviously, if COVID comes along or a global financial crisis, then suspend it. But in normal years, you should be able to say, we'll roughly build this many over time, so the council can then plan. If you have the housing delivery test, which is an innovation the government created in 2015, to try and say, stop focusing too much on land supply, focus on actually how many homes are being built in your area, which I think is the fundamental of flipping the planning system, is focusing on the housing delivery test, not the bloody land supply. If you have that in place, how can you do that unless the house builders commit to some kind of indicative build-out rate? And like I said, obviously you need to suspend it in certain times, but in general, and like I said, I've actually had quite a few discussions with SME house builders who have said, I could probably, if the quid pro quo of this was a streamlined planning system and a system that meant I got more land, I could definitely live with this as a trade-off, because I'd know what I was getting, I'd have enough land coming forward, and it would be easy to get planning permission, and in return I could give you that. But what I can't do, to be fair to them, they also said, if you just add your idea onto the existing system, that's just going to be another thing that will overload the SME sector. So all of this is ever sadly is tied together.
Eddie, on that, anything on that, or for investors, or Rob on the same?
Yeah, I just say I'm looking forward to reading Alex's report later today.
I think on the land debate and getting things moving, you know, from my point of view, when we get a planning permission, the land we control is usually optioned or on an agreement. We have a timescale to buy that land in, and we have to buy that land in a certain timescale as part of the contract. If we bought that land in, trust me, as an SME, we don't want to sit on it. We want to build out as quickly as possible because we're paying for it. So, you know, from my point of view, the more I can do to deliver a product that is popular with the local marketplace, that allows me to get on and build that scheme out as quickly as possible, delivering the right product, is hugely important. I have no desire to sit on it. It's costing us money, and unfortunately, we don't have several billion sitting in the bank to fund that land sitting there.
Rob, can I be terrible and ask you, do you think is it fair to say that the Treasury get the wool pulled over their eyes by the large house builders on this? Or am I being too mean by asking you a question?
I'm not going to answer that question. We have quite a prominent role in the HBF, and being able to continue talking that we're good. I think what I would say is, I'm not convinced that certainly the big three or the big 10 want to massively scale production up from where they are. Perhaps they're comfortable at the level they're at, that we're seeing a slight increase year on year. I don't see that filling the void. And I think that's probably the piece where SMEs really need to come back in. We go back 20, 30 years, there were something like 7,000. What are there now, less than 2 or something? So, you know, it's a big problem we've got to address if we want to really deliver more housing.
Well, I think that's actually quite a good place to end on the importance of, the key fact that we've all been discussing is that we want to build more houses, we want to build better houses, and we are going to require the SME sector to do it. And I'm very grateful and glad that we have Eddie in there to push through all these radical, revolutionary ideas, no matter how unpopular it makes him, no matter how many elections he loses. No, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to our panelists. We have an enormous range of amazing things in the CPS tent. Next up, we have Frank Luntz and Matthew Goodwin in conversation with Alice, we need diversity of names on our panels. That's all. With Matthew Goodwin and Frank Luntz in conversation with John Ashmore, and actually, if you're interested in net zero, we have a couple of really good panels on that. And I will at 6:30 be in conversation with Liz Truss. So please follow us on Twitter. Sign up to all of our newsletter lists, and of course, get your selfie with Margaret Thatcher, co-founder of the CPS, and on the way out, as I'm sure Eddie will be doing.
And subscribe to CapEx as well.
Indeed. But thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to Thacom, not just for sponsoring the panel, but for providing such insight into the state of the market, as well as the lovely snazzy blue lanyards that everyone else is wearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.